Greetings, this is Alan from Warndale Community Church. We're in a study on evil and good, and today's study is evil displayed in Genesis. Augustine said this: God judged it better to bring good out of evil than to suffer no evil to exist. And so we also, following this idea that God has allowed evil to exist, we have spoken about man's problem with evil, but God's purpose. Kind of a little bit of review. We talked about in our first study, we defined what evil was. Evil that is determined by God and not man. Moral evil, calamity evil, thinking evil, and man just being evil. The second study about God allowing evil. Particularly, we answered or dealt with the question of the problem of evil. If God is so all-powerful, all-knowing, and wholly good, then why is there evil? God is all-powerful, God is all-knowing and truly good, but has allowed evil to teach creation about what is good and evil and show us His glory, His greatness, and goodness in contrast. We also looked at the problem of good. If God is all-powerful and all-knowing and wholly just, then why is there any good? God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and truly just, but has allowed evil to teach creation about what is good and evil and to show His glory, His greatness, and justice. Study 3 was how evil became present in the world from the garden, how evil is present in man's thinking that he is good. We learned about the knowledge of good and evil, man's choice to become aware of good and evil in its many forms. By man knowing good and evil, he has become like one separated from God, and that's what we learned. How is the evil nature of man explained further in the book of Genesis and the events in Genesis? The phrase of the knowledge of good and evil or knowing good and evil does not carry forward in Genesis, but new phrases explain evil and good and the problem of man. What are the connections further in Genesis from the garden fall, the knowledge of good and evil, death, and other parts to the presence of evil? Let me give you just a summary. The rest of Genesis explains what happens with knowing good and evil. The evil man's actions are expanded to a greater extent. God demonstrates His wrath against that evil. The intentions of man are pointed out as corrupt from their inception in their thinking process. The knowing of evil and good extends to the very inner workings, the heart and mind. Evil intentions start from the time of youth, when they can tell the difference between good and evil. The heart is only evil continually. The same events that are purpose for evil can be designed by God for good. 5 events explain the evil nature of mankind, as well as our evil. First event is Cain's murder of Abel. In Genesis 4:1, now Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. God is the means by which the child Cain became, even though he turned out evil. Verse 2, it says, again, she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain was a worker of the ground. The birth of Abel was not highlighted the same way as Cain. They were brothers, each brother had a different primary occupation. Abel kept the sheep, and Cain worked the ground. It says in verse 3, in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. Verse 4, and Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock, and their fat portions, and the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. No specific time is mentioned when they brought their offerings. This is in contrast to the later time-oriented ways of sacrifice. No expectations are mentioned. The quality could be a point, but the use of the firstborn of the flock versus the first of the ground and not first fruits. The kinds of sacrifice brought were different. Each kind of sacrifice was acceptable in the law, Numbers 18:12. Regard tells us and means to look at with approval or to approve of. The Lord approved of Abel's offering in either the kind or attitude or even both. The Lord made a distinction related to the offering of each man. The use of the Hebrew word regard, pointed out in Isaiah 17:7, in that day man will look to his Maker, and his eyes will look on, that's our word, the Holy One of Israel. Verse 8, he will not look to the altars, the work of his hands, and he will not look on what his own fingers have made, either the Asherim or the altars of incense. He will look on God with approval, seeing him as important and valuable. He will not approve of idols that he made with his own hands. Back to Genesis 4:5, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain was very angry and his face fell. The reason for rejection or lack of approval is not immediately mentioned. The disapproval was both for Cain and his offering, so it is not just the offering, but the offerer. Cain's reaction was with anger, showing his disapproval of God's reaction to his offering. Just as God's creation was exceedingly good, so Cain was exceedingly angry. His facial expression dropped to look dejected, as a display of his evil state of anger. Verse 6 tells us, further, the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? God asked this question, why are you angry? A similar form of the question was asked of Eve. What is this that you have done? In Genesis 3:13. These questions get at the core of the evil that is now known inside. This asking is about his awareness of good and evil. Where does our anger come from? Why are we angry? The story continues, verse 7, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. The word translated well is our word good. The condition is that Cain is to do good and he will be accepted. There is either a previous knowledge standard for good, or he is now informed about it. This action to do well is to do good. If Cain was accepted, then his face would be lifted up versus his face being fallen, like in verse 6. There's a standard of doing good, but it also a result for not doing good. The failure to do good brings on a sinful, controlling disposition ready to be pounced on. Sin is pictured here as like a lurking criminal preparing to assault. The desire of this enemy, sin, is to rule over you and to the point of sinning. What is sin doing at the doorway or entrance? Pulling you through? How does sin have desires and rule over you? Like the sinful woman under the curse. Similar phrasing is used in Genesis 3:16. He is commanded to rule the sin at the entrance by doing the good God has told him. Cain does not. Verse 8, Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, when they were in the field. Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Cain either spoke to his brother about what God had said, or he called him to go out into the field. Abel is again described as his brother, with all the connotations of family and closeness. Cain killed his brother because he did not do good, refusing the correcting actions. Then sin came to rule him. The sin to kill Abel came by ruling of sin. So if the desire of good does not control, then the outcome will be sin with death following. Why did God allow this evil? This is one of those events that you have to think about. Why did he allow it? Verse 9, then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? And he says, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? God asked Cain where his brother Abel was. Cain does not know, or at least says he doesn't know. This know is the same word as knowing good and evil. He denies awareness. Cain states to the Lord that he is not the keeper of his brother. Cain thinks he can lie and God doesn't know it. Cain does not admit to doing evil and killing his brother. He doesn't even want to bring up the subject. Verse 10, the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." God asked him what he has done concerning his brother. This is the same question asked of Eve. His brother's blood announces his death from the ground, speaking for him because Cain will not tell the truth. It goes on, verse 11, "And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." God doesn't execute Cain for his murder, but allows him to live. The punishment for this murder is being driven away from the ground so that God would not let it be fruitful. The greater punishment, I think, was the distance from God that it would cause. God's face and the blessing of that face, he says, will be hidden from Cain. God's manifested his presence or face in some form at this time, at some place on the earth with man and able to approach him. The punishment goes on, verse 15, "And the Lord said to him," or helpful to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." So there's kind of like this protection. The Lord makes a mark on Cain, lest anyone or any who found him should kill him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain went away from some form or manifestation of God on the earth with men. The presence of the Lord provided access for men to sacrifice and then receive God's pleasure of accepting. This Cain is talked about in the New Testament in 1 John 3:12. "We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil, or evil one, and murdered his brother." And why did he murder his brother? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. They are to be not like Cain because of the evil that he became with his attitude and actions. This could be either the evil one or the evil principle. The murdering was from the evil. From the evil because his deeds were evil. His act of murdering was generated because his deeds of sacrifice were labeled evil, and so he wanted to eliminate the contrast. His brother's righteousness angered his evil mindset, so he destroyed the one who acted good and right. And this might, as we will find out, similar to that Satan and his rejection and his ultimately unrighteousness found, but that's for a different study. At this point, we're going to stop, and we'll pick up this study next time.